Right, there we
Okay,
go.
I'm here today with Miguel Marmolejo. I don't know if I'm
That was
pronouncing that.
good. That was perfect.
Is it really?
Yeah, that was actually perfect. Yeah.
That's great. Well, we're here today to kind of have a conversation. Um, Miguel is considerably younger than me, and I'm considerably older than him. And one of the things we've been talking about is how two disparate generations, let's see, we got to be probably 50 years apart. How can we bridge the gap so that older people can look upon younger people with open-mindedness and so forth, and younger people can look at older people with the same open-mindedness, and hoping that the two generations can relate to each other in ways that they haven't normally gone. So today, Miguel is going to tell us a little bit about his own background, and I'll share some of my own background as we continue the conversation. So, Miguel, maybe you could start by telling me what your own family history is, mother and father, siblings, where you were born, and that sort of thing.
All right. Well, I'm actually a San Diego native, so born and raised here. I moved a little bit when I was younger. But where I live right now, currently, I moved here when I was 8 or 9 years old. I'm 23 now,
Mhm.
so I've been here for quite a while, as you can imagine. Um, my parents are both from Mexico. My mother is from the state of Mexico, where the capital is. But she's from like a little town in the mountains. I think the population now is probably 1,000, but I imagine when she was younger, it was far less than that.
Mhm.
And then my dad is from a completely different state called Aguascalientes, which is hot water in Spanish. I guess it's known for hot springs.
Mm.
Um, and so he was born there, and they both actually met here in San Diego, which is pretty interesting, right? Like they're both from the same place or from the same like country, two different
Mhm.
places, but just met here. Um, right now it's just my mom. I didn't grow up with my dad as much. So I would say my dad was around until I was like 12, and then so from there onwards it was just my mom. I have two siblings, one older brother. He is 31 now, I think. I hope. Hoping I'm that right. And my younger brother, he is 21.
Mm.
Yeah. So I do live with my brother and my mom, or my older brother and my mom. My younger brother goes to school at UCLA, so he's over there for now. And yeah, I mean, other than that, what else can I say really? My parents met here in like 1990s, the 1990s, I think. And then they had my brother, obviously, right, younger brother, and then they never really moved anywhere else. They stayed here. So pretty much as soon as my brother was born, they just never left this place. Um, and then when I was like 12, my dad got deported, so he went back to Mexico. Right now he lives in Tijuana, so he lives like right across the border. Our relationship is a little bit more complex than that, which is why we don't talk to each other. Um, but I would say that that event, that whole thing was a very big reason as to why like I am who I am now, and I'm sure it will be mentioned in like the topics that we talk about later on about why I do certain things and stuff like that. I would say that had a big impact. Um,
Maybe we
but
could launch into that early on so that viewers can kind of understand. I've described you as an old soul in that you are older beyond your years, in terms of your wisdom, in terms of the way that you relate to people. Where do you think that came from?
Um, I guess we'll start like the very beginning. I think at a young age, I just had to mature naturally. Just a lot of stuff going on at home. It was a bit of a rough home life. Like even when my dad was around, it was a pretty rough home life. They just,
How was it? How was it rough? Was it conflict and arguing, or was there, physical stuff, or what's this definition of difficult?
It was a bit of everything. So my dad had a problem.
Hmm.
So as you can imagine, maybe that first that starts off with like bickering, maybe some arguing about that, right? And then as you can imagine, if that issue is consistent or persists, it can become physical.
Hmm.
So it kind of got to that point. Um, so that was pretty much what I was dealing with as a kid from as early as I can remember. We used to have a house. We used to live in Spring Valley, so a bit more east to where I live now. And I think we got that. It was like a townhome, like 2006 or something like that. And then 2008 came, and then we lost the house, which is why we moved to where we are now. But I want to say around the housing crisis, so around '07, '08 was around the time that I kind of needed to start growing up a little bit more because my dad lost his job, and then my mom was working all the time. So I pretty much my parents weren't really like there that often. So I was between babysitters that I can't even remember anymore. Like I remember staying in random places that I had never seen before or known before. So, but I guess I just kind of understood that my parents were, or at least my mom was working a lot. So I kind of really didn't have that option there. But I knew that I would go back home, right? So I guess that was the nice thing there. Um, and then when we came here, those issues with my dad kind of just became more persistent. He ended up getting another job, but because of my dad's drinking problem, he would get constant complaints about, oh, my dad was a plumber, so he would go to people's houses, and then people would complain to his company, like, hey, this guy smelled like alcohol or whatever.
Hmm.
So, and then in 2013, around February, my parents got, I think they got into a fight or something. This part I can't remember. But this day, I remember so vividly. It was the most random day ever because prior to this, I don't know how, but I poked my eyeball
Mm.
and I like scratched my eye or something like that, and I couldn't
Mm.
see out of it, and I had
Mm.
to go to school. My mom has always been very adamant about like sick, tired, you broke your leg, you're going to school. So I had hurt my eye to the point where I couldn't really keep it open without like it hurting. So I basically had like an eye patch this whole day at school.
Oh,
Um
wow.
but that night or the night before that day, I don't know what happened with my parents. Maybe my dad had like a tendency of just disappearing randomly. Like it wasn't even anything like they got into a fight or something like that. He would just kind of do his own thing. So I guess my dad drove somewhere drunk, not even far, maybe like 2 blocks away. And then for some reason in his drunkenness, he like pees in someone's front lawn and oh, that's my dog. I don't know if you can hear that. To like pees in someone's front lawn, and then they obviously called the police, right? As you would, I would do the same thing.
Hmm.
And then that changed everything. So then my dad was gone. He got deported like maybe a week later. But the
Mm.
issue more so with that was that my dad was the one making the money at the time. Like as a plumber, you're I say a lot of plumbers make pretty good money. He wasn't doing too bad for himself at the time. So that was a really big thing because we kind of just lost our financial like source. So between needing to grow up because my family dynamic was different and then needing to grow up more because then now we didn't have money, I think combining those two things really changed not only me, but also my younger brother. You can really tell my younger brother as well that he's a bit different in that regard. Like he had to grow
How,
up really fast too.
so how is
Um,
he different, Miguel?
I would say he's very like serious. And maybe he doesn't talk a lot about that stuff in
Mm.
the past. So I feel like when you look at my brother, my younger brother, you would think that he's older than he actually is.
Mm.
Which maybe is sad to say, to be honest. Um, but unfortunately, that's just how it went down there. And so at that point, when that happened, I kind of just needed to understand, what was happening. Like we didn't have money, so this is around high school, right? So I must be at this point going into high school. I'm 12, 13 years old, and I'm starting high school, which is already a huge change, right, in your life as when you're a teenager. Like that's,
Hmm.
puberty's happening,
Hmm.
hormones, all this kind of stuff. You're trying to figure out who you are as a person.
Hmm.
So I feel like I'm being bombarded with all these different things going on at the same time. But the one thing that I knew I needed to do was a lot of times to figure out stuff on my own because either my mom wasn't home, she was working, or my older brother was working. So between that and then trying to be like a big brother to my younger brother too, like there's just so many social dynamics going on that to this day I would say I feel like I didn't do that great of a job doing. I often tell Itia that like I felt like I could have been a better older brother, because on top of like taking care of him or trying to take care of him, I was trying to figure out things on my own. So it was like, maybe I was supposed to. This is a really good, I guess, example of like something that I would do is my brother was in a different school. He was in middle school still, so my mom would be like, "Hey, can you go? Would you walk to his school, pick him up, and then you guys walk together back home?" And then instead, I would get out of school, hang out with my friends, and then he would have to walk home by himself, right? Which maybe isn't even that big of a deal. Maybe that's just typical brother dynamics. But when I look back at it now, I feel pretty bad about the fact that I did that. But that's just an example of like how I was trying to deal with all these different things um going on. So um at that point, sorry, this is gonna be a kind of long, so hopefully that's okay. It's a lot of detail.
Let me interrupt and ask you a question because you're 12, 13, 14, you're just getting into high school. It seems that with the circumstances, you could have gone one of two ways. The path that you chose, this is like, this was 10 years ago when you're 13, you're 23 now.
Yeah.
You could have gone, down the path of forgetting high school, forgetting college, getting in with the bad crowd. My parents told me when I was young, when I was your age, at 13 anyway, that you are who your friends are. So who were your friends when you were 13 and 14? Were they responsible or were they irresponsible? And how did you choose?
You're gonna love this. If you like that saying, you're gonna love this, or that expression, you're gonna love this. So when I was in middle school, I hung out with people who were probably not too great to be hanging out with. Um, People who like didn't take school seriously, would mess around a lot. Those are the people that I hung out with when I was 12. So at the end of middle school. And then when I transitioned into high school, so 13, 14, 15, it changed. So I started hanging out with a different like crowd of people that I met in high school that just happened to be people who are actually pretty serious about school. Funny enough. So when that happened, when I first got to high school, I was a terrible student. Like I had really bad grades. Um, this was like a huge source of debate in my family because my mom was obviously very upset that I had really bad grades in school and stuff like that. So my first 2 years of high school, so 14, 15, I was doing terrible in school. And then, I don't know if it was just because I realized, actually, I would say that I realized when I was 15 that if I kept it up, I wasn't going to go anywhere. And um, a part of what helped me figure that out was that my teachers in school, I don't know how, but they kind of realized that I was smarter than I was acting.
Hmm.
So I would get a lot of passive aggressive comments about how like I would be doing better in class if I did my homework, or like I'm too smart to not be doing my homework, stuff like that. Um, and they would make it known like in front of everybody in the class that I was like not taking school seriously, even though like definitely could do better than I was at the time. So then when I started my junior year of high school is when everything changed for me. I decided I was going to take school very seriously because I wanted to go to college. And
Why did you want to go to college? Why was that a goal for you? What was that? Did you read about it or did you have friends that were going to college?
it's honestly something that I think so at the time that my brother, we could have a whole conversation about this honestly, but I think at my brother's generation, my older brother's generation, so he graduated high school in 2010. And I
Hmm.
feel like around that time, a little bit after the financial crisis or the housing crisis, I feel like there was a very big um agreement among everybody that if you went to college and you got a degree that you could get a good job, and if you were one person making 6 figures, um you could buy a house, right, or something like that, and maybe you could support your family off of just that one income. I feel
Hmm.
like I grew up hearing that even though I was much younger.
Hmm.
And then as I got into high school and then being around those teachers who were telling me, hey, you're smarter than you're acting, do your homework and stuff like that. They also talked a lot about how, going to school, get a degree, and then, you could get a good job and et cetera, buy a house, all that kind of stuff. And I think that that was true before, or maybe at that time. Um, but so that was basically what I'm getting at is that that was the whole, jargon.
Motivation.
Yeah, it was oh, well, if I, if they're telling me that if I can go to school and I can work hard and get a degree, maybe I don't have to, be struggling at home, which I was, right? And also I would say that school to me is very stimulating mentally.
Hmm.
So I really like, though it depends on the class, of course. Like for example, I'm very bad at math. But reading and stuff like that, history, philosophy, that kind of stuff, literature even, I really like that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
So when I was going towards the end of high school, I feel like that was more of the stuff being talked about. I guess the classes got harder in a way, and I found that very mentally stimulating. And then I feel like I started liking school more because of that. So to me, it was like, oh, well, if I like school and I like learning, I feel like it makes sense to just go into university, right? Like just transition.
Hmm.
Um, Obviously there's other factors, right? Loans, that's a really big thing currently. Thankfully I don't have any loans. I don't have to pay for school, so I got very lucky there. Um,
Well, let me stop you there for a second, Miguel, because we're still 13, 14, 15. You still have a couple of years left of high school.
oh yeah.
How did you um, end up, where did you go to high school, and then how did you decide what college to go to? That
The school I went to is it's actually it's called Morse. It's known to be at before my generation, it was known to be pretty bad in terms of gangs. So
mm,
it wasn't that great of a school before. It's getting better now. They're actually remodeling it right now. But when I was going there, it was still had that reputation. And honestly, in terms of the quality of education, compared to maybe a school in like Rancho Bernardo or Del Mar or something like that,
mhm.
it wasn't anything to compare to. Like, yeah, honest on the outside, literally looks like a prison.
Wow.
Um, Not to
What
say
were
that
the
the teachers
what
weren't
were the
good, but
kids like in your interaction? How did you separate, as they say, the wheat from the chaff? You are who your friends are. How did you choose your friends?
um, so I don't know why, but in my first like year of school, so my freshman year, my ninth grade year, they put me in the advanced English, advanced math,
Mm.
which, and I'm not sure like how that even happened because honestly, I was not meant for that at all. That's why I think that's another reason why I did bad too those first few years because those classes were way too hard for me. And so, but in those classes, I was surrounded by people who were very different compared to the people that I was used to hanging out with in
Mm.
middle school. So just because they were around me, uh, obviously I became friends with them. And then honestly, there's a very big social factor too. Like if my friends are all doing good in school and I'm the one doing bad, I feel like I look stupid or I look like, I don't
Hmm.
want them to make fun of me because I don't
Hmm.
want them to think that I'm dumb.
Hmm.
So I think that
Yeah.
also was something else.
Hmm.
So then that's what transitioned me into hanging out with specifically those people. But in terms of like how most people were at my school, um, my school was predominantly, I would say, maybe like a third Filipino, a third uh Hispanic, and then or Latino, and then the other third was black.
Mm.
So that's pretty much mirrors the demographics of my neighborhood of where I live now because I live by the school.
Hmm.
Um, So, but yeah, I got situated with the good kids because of that. And then there wasn't anything gang related going on or anything crazy like that. It was more so that just the kids that just didn't do good were most of the time just messing around, like they just didn't take school seriously and stuff like that. And I would say that it's also not necessarily their fault either because there wasn't really a whole lot of opportunity, I feel like, at the school to maybe even, because people are into different things, right? So while, for example, I'm not good at math at all, but I like sorry, subjects. So maybe for somebody else, it's the same. Maybe like English and math is not something that works for them or works with them mentally, but something else may be far more stimulating that, maybe it's not a traditional subject, let's call it that. But could be something that could be used or crafted to for the future, right? Because there's so many professions that people can do
Hmm.
that can fit with what they're good at. And so I feel like that wasn't really something that was presented a lot at the school. Again, maybe lack of resources or whatever you want to call it, financial means. Um, So I think that if you were doing bad at school and you were hanging out with like bad kids, unless you somehow figured it out on your own or somebody told you something, because oftentimes, even when people tell you things, like me personally, you could tell me to not do something and I'll still do it because I'm the kind of person that for some reason I have to learn things on my own. Like I have to do them and then figure out like hands-on, I guess if you want to call it that.
So in other
So,
words, if at your age 23, if you had a chance at the 23-year-old Miguel to talk to the 13-year-old Miguel and say, oh, look, you could cut the corner on this and avoid all the pain and so forth, what you're saying is you wouldn't listen to you
yeah, I wouldn't have
until
listened to myself.
you wouldn't.
Yeah,
So,
100%.
yeah, so your influences, though, from others um, paved the path so that talk about how you chose to go to the college that you did and how you were able to finance it and all of the nitty-gritty stuff. That's not an easy task.
So I'll start. Okay, so I did bad in school, right? Specifically, I did bad in my first 2 years of high school. And so, although I did good in the later parts of high school, unfortunately, when you put everything together, with my grade point average and stuff like that, it was just too low. I still applied to schools, and I had to do summer school and stuff to try to improve like my grades and whatnot. But unfortunately, with everything put together, it just wasn't enough to get accepted into the schools. Um, and so I basically had to go to community college, right? Which
Hmm.
at the end of the day, to me, I actually feel like that was the better choice for me
Mm.
in the end. I think a lot of people will agree with that, that maybe they were going to go to a 4 year straight away, but junior
Hmm.
college was like an opportunity to
Yes.
mature or like figure things out.
Hmm.
Um, but I was really, really caught up on trying my best to just go straight into a 4 year because at this point, everyone around me was going. My best friend, so I went to UCSD just to fast forward a little bit, but my best friend also went to UCSD, but he went straight away. And so like seeing everyone else around me kind of going straight into those 4 years and stuff like that, I was pretty
Hmm.
bummed out about that. So naturally, when I finished high school and then I went to junior college, I really wanted to make sure that I could transfer from junior college to a 4 year university. So that was, on top of my own motivation, right? Like just finding a good job and getting a good job and stuff like that. I would say that that was another factor that was driving me to do the same. Um, Navigating things like financial aid and stuff like that, I would say that what I struggled the most with was figuring out how to fill that out with parents that like are undocumented. So
Hmm.
like, first of all, my dad's not even here, and then my mom is like getting paid under the table. So it's like I have to figure out how I'm supposed to fill out. And then you're also worried about because it's like a form that the government has you fill out. It's like kind of scary because then you don't want to mess up. Otherwise, um,
It's on your
maybe
record.
you'll get in trouble or something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, you don't know. You're young, so it's like you don't know what's gonna happen, right?
Did you have
Um,
advisors to advise you in any of
yeah,
this?
yeah. So that's exactly what ended up happening. Basically for FAFSA, it's called FAFSA. I'm sure you know that. Actually, I
Hmm.
don't know why I explained that to you. FAFSA takes the income of your parents. Um, and so an issue that basically I had was that my parents are legally married, but they are separated, right? In terms of they don't live together and they haven't lived together for a long time. So my original advisor, she was very, very adamant about needing to fill in the income for both of my parents, which was basically impossible for me, because like I didn't talk to my dad. And so then I ended up finding online a this person. Her name is like Amy Scully or something like that. She actually works for. She has her own nonprofit. She's a lawyer. She has her own nonprofit where she helps like these kinds of cases, and she's actually based out of City Heights. I think she's in Hoover High School. I think that's where I met her.
Hmm.
Um, and so I reached out to her and I was like, "Hey, this is my issue. Could you help me out?" And she said, "Sure." So we were supposed to meet that week, and then I think her mother passed away or something like that, and then she had to go to Ohio, and then so then I had to, obviously she has her own stuff to deal with, so I was pretty much waiting on just her to like help me out, and I do feel bad, but she like came back 1 week later, and she was just like, okay, like I'm back, I'll help you. And I was like, man, I don't know if that's enough time to grieve, you know? So
Mm.
she comes
Mm.
back. She's very, very nice, lovely person. Like I still remember this interaction to this day. But
Mm.
she helped me out with that, and I was able to get it filled out. And then, um, basically from that point onward, every time I needed to fill it out, I just followed her advice that she had gave me initially. But that's how I figured out how to, um, fill that out to get support for school. And basically, just because my mom makes like no money whatsoever, um, I got to go to school for free. So very lucky. Not anything like I got a scholarship because I'm smart. It was just like my mom is like, or we're poor, so here you go, kind of thing.
So you
Um,
went to community college and then you went to UCSD?
yeah.
And so where are you in terms of college at this particular point in time?
Now, like currently,
Yes.
I graduated in 2022, 2 years ago. I graduated a little bit early, so I wanted to be a lawyer originally. So I studied history. Um, I studied history more so because I wanted to have a really good GPA so that I could apply to law school. And history is a lot of writing and reading, so those skills translate to law school. Um, so my plan was to do that, get a really good GPA, and then go to law school, and so forth and so on. Um, and then
What changed your mind?
yeah, so my last year of undergrad, I got a job working on campus for CalFresh, which is for those who don't know, it's basically what EBT is now, food stamps. So that's what they
Hmm.
call the organization now,
Hmm.
CalFresh. And it was just helping students apply to get help with food assistance.
Mm.
And but working in that job, I got to play with like spreadsheets and stuff like that, which is really funny thinking looking back at this because I hated math before, but I realized I like statistics. So I don't like algebra, but I like statistics. But you see how I figured that out way later, but
Hmm.
I wasn't really presented with that opportunity when I was younger to make that distinction. So it wasn't that I hated math, it was that I hated like algebra and calculus, but I like statistics. So
What was your
um
major at UCSD, Miguel?
it was history.
Oh, history.
Yeah, I'm a huge history buff. I
What
really
what
like
stage of history? Ancient history?
it was US history with emphasis on like economic history, if that makes sense. So it was like how different economic policies that like different presidential cabinets had, like how did it affect not only the US economy, but like the international economy and stuff like that. So it was but I had to take, as you can imagine, a bunch of different history classes, so it wasn't specifically just that. But that was my emphasis, I suppose. Um, but I got that job, I really liked it, and then thinking about it more, I was like, if I don't get a full ride to law school, I'll go into tons of debt. Um, I had talked to some lawyers before this, when I
What kind
was
of law were you interested in pursuing?
securities and stuff like that. So business,
Security and exchange
yeah.
law.
And then so I talked to some lawyers in the field actually, um, and there was like a general consensus that you go to law school, you get tons of debt if you don't get a full ride, and then your first 3 or 4 years of law school or law career, sorry, you're working like 4 or 5 years of just like nonstop crazy hours, right? Like 80 hours maybe a week or something like that. They were just telling me, like, yeah, it's you basically are working your ass off to grind the debt, and then it's a part of just the culture.
Hmm.
And I was like, man, I don't want that. What the heck am I doing? Like, that sounds horrible. Like, yeah, the money is great and all, but I'm not really cutthroat like that. I'm a very like relaxed and happy person. I don't want to do something like that. So at that point, I was like, well, I'm not in debt. So I suppose if I want to take my time to figure things out, I can because I don't have that financial pressure of $100,000 loans, behind me.
Hmm.
So then that's when I started kind of taking my time figuring things out. But I guess between all of this, right? So between like figuring out school and high school and figure out what I want to do in the future and figuring out like navigating everything, I always sought other people for advice. And
How did you choose the people to whom you would ask advice.
So as you already know, for a while I played video games professionally, right?
Hmm.
So a part of me not doing good in school was that I was also just playing video games the whole time. And I got really good at a particular video game, and I got to uh, travel the world. I got to make money from playing the video game, all while I was going to school. So I was like doing school, and then COVID helped with this too because school was online. So then I could play more games and play
Hmm.
tournaments, and then like do school online. So I got really lucky in that regard. Um, and but in this process, I met a lot of people much older than I am, who were fans of mine. I hate to say it like that because it sounds like I'm bragging, but these people liked watching me play. And so then,
What for those that aren't familiar with video games, what's the talent? What's the skill that separates you from the other players on these video games? Is it eye-hand coordination? Is it mind? What is the talent that you bring to the table that separates you from the other gamers?
so this particular game that I play, it's called StarCraft 2. Um, but the original version of this game actually came out in the late 90s. So, and I didn't play it. I played a little bit of that one, but I didn't become professional at it. I became professional at the version that came out later. It came out in 2010. Um, and so my brother or my dad actually bought this game at a Circuit City. Those don't even exist anymore. My
Hmm.
dad bought this game at a Circuit City for my older brother, and then I just happened to play it because he played it, and then but basically is this game, I would say what separates me from the others is yeah, hand-eye coordination definitely, and also decision making. So being able to make decisions very quickly, based on maybe little information that you have. It's a very fast-paced game, actually. And this game is generally known to be probably like one of the hardest games to get good at. So especially amongst older people who grew up watching this game, there seems to be like a general consensus that that's true. This game also was like one of the first games to make professional gaming mainstream, if you want to call it that.
Mm-hmm.
So after this game, then other games that came out also adopted like a professional scene. And then that paved the way for those big, tournaments with like maybe a $500,000 prize pot and stuff like that. Um, but because everyone who watched this game was much older, I just happened to be like thrown into a crowd that was much older, right? Not, I say much older, but let's say maybe mid 30s, early 40s,
When you
right?
say older, Miguel, help me understand. Uh, are you playing side by side? Or are you playing online where you don't even see the other person? How does that work?
So playing from home, I can't see them, right? So, uh, I could be playing somebody from anywhere, right? As long as they're in the game. At the actual tournaments, you are side by side.
Hmm.
So I played on it's a one versus one game. So it's just you and the other person. And the people who were playing professionally were around my age. It was more so the crowd demographic was much
Hmm.
older.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I would play like on stages in front of like hundreds of people and stuff like that, which is very fun. Um, but yeah, you're playing side by side. It's just you and that person, and I would say it's pretty nerve-wracking at first,
Nerve,
especially
you said nerve, is that your term, nerve-wracking? Well,
yeah,
how did you learn how to control your nerves? Because I would imagine it's not unlike any professional sport that involves eye-hand coordination. It's the mental aspect, in terms of, particularly if you're sitting side by side. I would think if you're virtual, you can't, you wouldn't necessarily be intimidated, or
yeah,
they couldn't play mind games. Whereas if you're side by side, isn't there a psychological pressures that could be put on either through nonverbal communication or some sly comments?
yeah. So this might sound pretty crazy, but professional gaming has developed so much to the point where teams have sports psychologists. So the team that I was playing for at that time had an in-house sports psychologist, like
Wow.
certified sports psychologist based out of Australia. And so I worked with him for maybe like 6 months or something like that.
Tell me the specific. When you say you worked with him, what did he do? What did you do? Did you have exercises? How did that work?
So this is something that even to this day I like remember all the stuff that he taught me and stuff like that. It's basically we get on a call together, and the way he did it specifically, as I imagine, it's different, depending who you're talking to and where you get sports psychology from and stuff like that. Specifically, he would kind of let you guide the session. So, maybe I was having trouble with staying consistent. So maybe some days I would play really good, and some days I'd play really bad.
Is that
Um,
focus? Is that because of focus or
uh,
something else?
it could be focus. It could be that there's some sort of change in your life from a big change to a minor change.
Hmm.
Um, to be even more specific, sometimes even the number of hours you sleep, what you ate. Um, maybe for example, if you're used to exercising 5 days a week, and then for some reason life happens, and for a while you can only exercise 3 days a week, that
Hmm.
might be enough to kind of put your mental at like uneasy, make your mental uneasy,
Hmm.
which maybe translates to not being able to focus as well in the game. So we talked a lot about stuff like that, like how to maintain a routine and adopt a routine that
Well,
is
sleep,
healthy.
diet, and exercise, when you get to be older, that's when it's accumulated. And so I know for me as an older person, I realize that sleep, diet, and exercise is under my control. My genetics, I have no control over, but I can certainly get sleep, diet, and exercise. So that fits regardless of whether you're a gamer or whether you're in any other sort of business. So that's the kind of thing that is applicable to whatever you would do in life.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So that's what I was saying too earlier, how I could use that now. Like I still use it to this day.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, it's stuff like that. Then it's stuff like how to deal with crowds. So if you get nervous playing in front of people, something specifically that we talked about is called mental imagery,
Hmm.
where you would leading up the days leading up to the event, you would visually imagine the crowd, and maybe you would think about how you would walk up the stage, how you would interact with people. You would try to imagine that ahead of time so that when it
Hmm.
actually happened, it was almost like you've been there before. And this
Hmm.
this is actually you can read about this online. There's actual like journals, like medical journals on this kind of stuff.
Well,
Um,
Psycho-Cybernetics is a book by Maxwell Maltz that uh, talks about. This is a book that's been out for, decades, but it talks about the difference between imagining shooting free throws, physically shooting free throws, or doing nothing. And those that imagine shooting free throws progress at the same rate as those that actually physically shot free throws, and they both improve more than those that did nothing. So
right.
psychological aspects is really an important, no matter what you do in life. That's true.
Yeah, and it's really crazy to think about that kind of stuff because I think the average person maybe not even think about stuff like that, right? Unless you
Mhm.
either read about it, because it specifically caught your eye, or in my case, that it just happened to be a part of what I was doing, which is the professional gaming. Um, so it was that kind of stuff. And we had like session notes we would build upon previous topics, or maybe if something else I was having a trouble with came up, we would talk about that. Um, but Yeah, it was great. I honestly I wish even now that I could still do it. I wasn't paying for it at the time, so as soon as I was not on that team anymore, unfortunately, I didn't have that access to that service anymore. But thankfully, I got to get a good chunk out of it, good chunk of information out of it to help me out there.
How do those teams work? So is it like other professional sports where they have leagues and teams
Mhm.
and so forth? So as a professional, are you still a professional now at this point, or what's
Uh,
your status?
I'm officially retired. Um,
Retired.
I play for fun, and you can still say that I'm good at the game, right? Like I don't just suddenly lose all my knowledge and skill and stuff. But I don't compete for money anymore, at least not to the degree that I was before. If I have time and I'm not doing anything, sure, maybe if there's something open that I can play in or something like that. Sometimes there's like cups, just like they call it cups, yeah, cups during the day or on the weekend or something like that. Maybe I'll play in that, see if I can make a few bucks. But in terms of like traveling across the country or to a different country to play a tournament, I'm not doing that anymore.
Well,
Um,
what does your career look like in the next, say, 5 years? You're 23. You got 7 years before you're 30. Where do you see yourself at 30? Where would you like to see yourself at 30?
hopefully I have a house by the time I'm 30. That would be nice. But I guess career wise, let's see. So I've now been working 4 months. Yeah, barely 4 months. Um, I work as a technical trainer. That's my official title. So basically, what I do is I work for a tech company that gives offers services to Google. So this
Mhm.
company has like a contract with Google. I think it's like a 6 year contract. It renews every 6 years, and there's like obviously details in that contract of like what needs to be fulfilled and stuff. But basically, I coach tech support people on how to like talk to either do their jobs or how to talk to the clients. So specifically, the people that work for Google, if they have an issue with their laptop or their computer or anything like that, they obviously put in what's called a support ticket to the tech support, and then that tech support staff work for the company that I work for, so we train them on how to do their job.
Hmm.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Well, let me ask you a question. You're a trainer of people that relate to the customer. So, how deep do you go? It would seem like you have a couple of different paths. One is the technical aspect of what they're helping a customer with, but it sounds like yours is almost as much, maybe not sports psychologist type, but more interpersonal in terms of communication. Is
Yeah,
that
that
right?
that's fair to say. Yeah, it's more so I trained them on like how to talk to the customer. Um, I guess like why their service is important and like how to make sure that they're consistently, how do I say, like giving good customer support, but also still being efficient with their job. It's a pretty intense job for them, unfortunately, because they have to make sure that they're resolving the issues relatively quickly. There's like set guidelines. So, if my computer is broken, they need to be able to help me fix that within a certain amount of time, to I guess fulfill the contract that we have. But imagine you have to resolve an issue relatively quickly, but you also need to make sure that you're like offering good service in terms of like the interpersonal aspect of that service to the customer, right? It's a bit intense. So I coach them more on that side, as you mentioned. Um, and then we still make a couple of technical courses. So they take like little online trainings, maybe like an hour or so with like a follow-up test or quiz or something like that. So we still do some of the technical stuff, but the training specifically that I do is more interpersonal. Yeah.
Is that fulfilling for you? Is that excite you to get up in the morning to let me put it another way. What's the biggest challenge in your career right now?
Uh, I do like it. I'd say the biggest challenge in my career right now is just understanding like corporate dynamics, right? Like, um, it feels very political, like bureaucratic, because you want to move up in the ladder, right? So you have to think about like either getting a promotion, so having good enough performance to get a promotion. Obviously, good performance doesn't guarantee you getting a promotion, right? So maybe you need to think about getting a different job or maybe transferring to a different team. So right now for me, I would say the hardest part is getting used to all of that, not even so much the job itself. Um, Especially as somebody who just graduated and this is my first like I guess important or like corporate job. I guess I'll call it corporate. My first like corporate job. Yeah. I think once I get used to how the dynamics work, then I can focus more on getting better at my job specifically. I don't know if that makes sense, right? Like getting good at my actual job,
Well, do you
Um,
have metrics that they hold you accountable to? You know, it seems that there's a lot of, I could see where there'd be some subjectivity to it because you're really training the trainers, and the trainers are the ones that have interaction with the customer, which they could be good or bad, but you're, from what I understand, trying to train those trainers.
yeah, we're trying to, yeah, so there are metrics involved, like they're not if they're not finished, if they're not resolving the issues fast enough, right, then that'll become an issue with maybe like uh maybe they repeat a certain mistake. It actually happened recently. There's been an issue recently where some of these people keep forgetting to do a specific task that unfortunately is kind of a big deal. So, corporate will come to my team and they'll be like, "Hey, we have this persistent issue. Can you make a training that they can take to fix
Mhm.
that issue so it doesn't happen again?" So yeah, stuff like that. Those kinds of metrics do exist. It's also, are we training enough people? How often are they being trained? We have another thing called the 0 to 90. So it's training a new hire within 3 months or 90 days. Um, so there's some metrics, but I've never felt like the metrics were so cutthroat that like they were impossible to meet or anything like that to reach. I'm sure that's a common sentiment in other corporate jobs that the metrics are sometimes unrealistic or unreasonable. But at least for now, from what I've experienced, everything seems uh like attainable, fairly attainable. Yeah.
There's a couple of things that come to mind as I'm listening to you talk, Miguel. You seem like you're quite self-aware, not only in terms of your cognitive thoughts, but your emotions. Um, we've kind of talked about that as to where that comes from. Uh, is your mother or your father have the same degree of self-awareness as you? And this is a multiple choice question, but your relationship with your dad, do you foresee any time in the future that either you or he would want to have kind of a conversation to um, keep the drawbridge of relationship open, or are you not open to that?
So funny enough, I feel like, well, I'll start with my mom first because I've obviously known her more or not longer. I guess you want to say that, or and better. My mom is like the least open-minded person ever.
Least
So
open-minded.
yeah, like my mom hates tattoos, which is funny considering Itzia has tattoos, right?
Yeah.
Um, my mom's like very traditional. Like where she comes from is a very traditional place. My mom is pretty religious. I am not religious whatsoever. That's something that she doesn't even know. Because I feel like if I tell her, she will just lose it. And I feel like,
We shouldn't let her watch this video
yeah, definitely not gonna keep
then.
that under wraps. But yeah, I mean, I would say like specifically like when Itzia told me how you were doing this, honestly, I was pretty surprised because I feel like a lot of older people are not as open-minded, or I feel like people get more conservative as they get older. So
It's
like,
probably true, but I think there's have you heard of the term cognitive dissonance?
yes.
Cognitive dissonance is part of staying young, I think. That and curiosity and the desire to learn and to grow as a person rather than to be stuck in the mud, as it were. Um, yeah, you're right. I think as people get older, they think they have all of the answers. And
Mhm.
the reality is that they don't. Nobody does.
Yeah.
And so to maintain two things, one is cognitive dissonance. This is my opinion. And the other is a willingness to embrace ambiguity, meaning you're not always going to find the answer. And so ambiguity and the ability to have ambiguous and not have an answer is a tough thing to do because most people want to have an answer. It's either yes or no,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of gray area. And so to maintain that ambiguity requires some self-discipline. And that's not always easy for anyone to do, whether you're young or you're old. But as you get older, it is difficult. So,
Yeah, I think it's as you said. You just feel like you haven't figured out, or there are you've lived your whole life doing things a certain way that it kind of just sticks, right? It's almost like a habit. Like you know that doing this has worked for you in the past, or thinking a certain way has worked for you in the past. So a lot of times we just sort of stick to that. So and I compare this to like my mom, where she grew up, like if you had a tattoo, maybe you were like a gang member or something like that. Or like if you weren't religiously affiliated, if you weren't a Catholic, then maybe you were some bad person. And maybe at the time, I don't know, maybe there was some truth to that where she lived specifically, right, for some of that stuff. But I think for her, like going to church and like not doing that kind of stuff has like maybe made her feel like she's accomplished what she's accomplished. And so, now it's like I was like, I'm not religiously affiliated, right? And even though my mom even took me to the church and I did a lot of the sacraments and stuff like that, I can like she wanted me to do all that stuff so I could get married to the church. But I have like no interest in doing that, right? But I think like that is a big cultural thing too, right? Like for her doing all that stuff to be able to get married to the church was like very essential, maybe even for survival, right? Because at least where she lives, small town, people have children when they're very young, people get
mhm.
married when they're very young. So maybe you could even say that it was a form of survival, right? So, but
Well,
yeah, going back to the, oh, sorry, go ahead.
let me ask you this because we're actually at the crux of what could also be, from a metaphoric standpoint, the differences in generation. Your generation and your mom's generation, there's this difference of how you see life, what worldview, what filter she was brought up with, for
Hmm.
example, in the Catholic Church, religion and faith. And you, on the other hand, have rejected it for whatever reason. Um, have you ever had a conversation? There's a couple of different ways that people that have differences of opinion interact. One is that one or both try to convince the other person that they're wrong, which, in my way of thinking, never goes anywhere because you just end up frustrated rather than most people have a desire to be understood. So, from your mom's perspective, I would imagine, being the older person myself, is that they want the best for you and it's worked for them. And why aren't you interested in it? From
Yeah.
your standpoint, you might have other reasons, skepticism, I don't need it. There's any number of reasons I could argue on your side and also on her side. The question is, have you, and maybe this is difficult, particularly with parents, um, inquiring, inquiring minds want to understand. And if you ever ask the question, Mom, you know, help me understand why it, how did you come about your uh, interest and your need for faith? Why, what's your rationale? And with the attitude from your perspective of just sheer curiosity, like if you're solving a problem and you put all of the cards on the table where you're looking for truth, say, for example, uh, now as a lawyer, lawyers can ask leading questions to kind of weasel people into giving the answer that they want. But in this case, that's doesn't have to be your motivation. It could be, gee, I just really want to understand my mom because she's had a tough life and she's had to rely on something. She couldn't necessarily rely on a person. So she relied on her faith. That's an understandable reason why a person would go to the extremes given the circumstances that she had to deal with.
Yeah.
So once there's understanding as to the why a person does something, it makes it a little easier perhaps to accept her rationale, whether or not you choose to make that decision for yourself. But at her heart, this is what I would suggest is that the reason she's doing it is because she loves you. She loves Miguel. You're her son. She wants the best for you.
Yeah.
So that's her rationale. But the question, I guess, would be, would you ever feel it would be worthwhile to ask her these questions? Would she argue it? Would she try and sell you on it? And if so, how could you keep your guard down and be open to trying to understand her?
So I've actually asked her a lot of this stuff before, and I always take a very Socratic approach to it. So I'll be like, well, why this, or what
Mhm.
made you feel this, or why this, just kind of like ask questions
Mhm.
to build upon what she's saying. A lot of times when we get into these topics of conversation, it will always good resort to her saying, "That's just how it is," which I'm sure you've heard so many times before, maybe even from your friends or anything like that. It's just if you ask a lot, if you get to that point, to the core, I feel like the core concept or issue related to the question is always that's just how it is, or like that's how it was, or it's stuff like that. So usually that's what happens. Um, if I talk to my mom and I'm like, well, why can't I get a tattoo? She's like, no, like that you're gonna look ugly. It's gonna make you look like a bad person. And I'm like, okay, but why would that make me ugly or make me look like a bad person? And they should be like, because that's just how it is. Like that. So it's like I'm sure there's more in there. Like I'm sure if I try hard enough, maybe I could try something out of there. But at least as of late, when I do try, it goes back to that, which is that's just how it is. Or like oh like well, why do I need to get married to the church? And she's like, well, that's just how it is. Like you're a Catholic. Well, granted, she doesn't know that I'm a Catholic, so I suppose there's that's a different issue at hand, right? But that's more so the point. So at least for now, I've kind of backed off on being very persistent because a lot of times when we do have these conversations, it'll get to the point where my mom is like crying, like like she can't believe. I feel like I'm destroying a perception of her son that she has, right? And I do think at some point I will have to, no matter what, and I'll just have to hope for the best there. Um, just so that she could get to know me more, right? Because my mom doesn't really speak English that well, so we communicate in Spanish, right? And then I do feel like a lot of the stuff that I can um how do I say this? Like when I'm talking
Articulate.
yeah, articulate or even if I'm talking to my brothers and stuff like that, a lot of stuff that we talk about amongst each other, she may not be able to pick up on or understand. And obviously when I'm talking to my brothers, that shows a big part of my a big part of my personality is on display
Mhm.
and she may not be able to understand that so she may not be able to like see that dynamic or see how even like my brothers and I interact in English to understand a piece of us some more um so yeah there's a lot of things that I could do better on my end. I agree. And I think having patience is just key, and I think I'm a very patient person, so I try not to let it bother me too much. Like I understand that this is her worldview and this is how she's approached life and it's just natural, right? um
One of the things I might mention, because, my mother passed away in 1995. So I don't know how many years ago that is. It's a couple of decades ago, but she asked me at the time, she developed lung cancer, and she actually died in 8 months from the time she was diagnosed to the time she passed away. But during one of the chemo treatments, she asked me, she said, Ron, would you be willing to be with me when I take my last breath? And it was a moment in time that I remember when I was a little kid, 3, 4 years old, holding her hand, going through the supermarket or whatever. And here you fast forward and she's going through chemo treatment and I'm walking through the parking lot holding her hand, except the roles were reversed. And so I was fortunate and blessed to be able to carry out my promise to her that I would be with her when she took her last breath. My reason for bringing this up is there is still time in your life and your mother's life, hopefully, that you'll be able to navigate some of these difficult um, subjects. So as time marches on, it's important to do what's important versus urgent. There are certain urgent things that we find ourselves having to do, but there are important things that maybe might not seem so important at the time. So that's what I'm suggesting, that
Mhm.
in preparation for, 30 years from now, perhaps, or 40, depending upon how old your mother is, you want to have the kind of open and transparent relationship where you can see her as the person she is, and she can see you as the person you are, in terms of your heart. I think you probably know her heart better than she knows your heart. I don't know. It's a question as much as anything. But that's where the old saying, where the rubber meets the road, is so important, is giving grace and mercy because you know that person's heart. You came from this woman. She has a responsibility. She has a caring, a love for your brother, your both of your brothers, and for you. Um, you know, you're in a situation where you don't have children yet, perhaps, um, but perhaps one day you will. And as a father, you'll have certain responsibilities too. I have two boys that um, I had, well, one when I was 19 years old, and the second one when I was 20. So I had two kids by the time I was 21. So I had early responsibilities. But I don't know where I'm going with this. I guess just more of an encouragement, Miguel, to keep the door open for her, because as an older person myself, it sometimes takes me longer to accept certain things. And if it's done in a, see, I'm an entrepreneur. I've been in business for myself my whole career. Why? Because I hate being told what to do. And so I'm so stubborn and so forth, but that doesn't mean I can't change my mind. Um, that's a good thing and a bad thing. So from your mom's uh, situation and standpoint, her um, connection to faith and religion is born out of necessity, it seems to me, where
Yeah.
it was something that she leaned into when she couldn't lean into anyone else as a human being. So that's, to me, makes an ultimate amount of sense, even though you may not agree with the method that she's doing. Her motivation is something that I know you could understand.
Yeah, don't worry, Ron. The time will come when I get my first tattoo on my forearm and I walk through that door. It's gonna hit her like a truck. So it's coming. It's coming. And definitely sooner than she thinks. But yeah, I understand. Time is not infinite by any means, right? And I got to make sure that, when I do that, I don't wait too long. And also just like don't be afraid of the outcome, right? Like at the end of the day, it's gonna be the right thing to do. And I also can't necessarily control her response or
You
whatever.
can,
And then,
you can.
worst case scenario, time often heals wounds, right? So
How about
maybe
your dad now? What about do you see any perspective or yeah, I guess perspective, any circumstances with your dad where you can maybe the word doesn't necessarily fit reconcile, but where you come to at least understand each other, where he understands where you're coming from, or do you think he does?
Man, honestly, I've seen my dad one time since he got deported,
Hmm.
and I would say from like then till now, I don't think he's really changed that much. Um, this is like something that I really struggle with personally because I've never had a man-to-man conversation with my dad, like father, not even father to son, just man-to-man kind of thing.
Hmm.
Um, I think a part of that is because I think when he thinks about like me or maybe my younger brother, he thinks about us when we were like 12,
Hmm.
right? Like he has a younger version of us in his mind. Like that's
Hmm.
kind of what he was left with.
Hmm.
Um, and the other thing is, I think my dad's has a drinking problem, so it's a bit difficult to like navigate that. I mean, honestly, I've always been open to it. That's not really something I share actually, but I've always been open to like us talking again. But I'm waiting on him to kind of show that he's different. And unfortunately, he has not shown that he's different. Which sucks, but like my mom and him, they still communicate sometimes. So it's just even I even tried talking to him. It's not that I've never talked to him. I've talked to him too. I've tried to have like conversations with him, just doesn't work out. So I think if he can kind of show that he's changing, then I'll be more open to it. But the last time that I went about this, that's what ended up happening was like I kind of tried and then it was just like he still had his same issues. And then on top of that, he wasn't really talking to me like I was like a 22, 21-year-old man. I was like 12 still. So it was a bit rough. Um,
Oh, you don't feel that he gave you any respect?
it's just, I don't even know how to explain it. It's like, I wouldn't even say it's a respect thing. It's just like the way he was talking to me was like, he was like making jokes or like saying things that he used to say to me when I was like 12. But
Hmm.
that wasn't really what I was looking for. Like,
Hmm.
for example, I was like telling him, hey, like this is my girlfriend. Like we've been dating for X amount of time, and I kind of wanted him to have a conversation with me about that, but it didn't develop into a conversation. So it was a lot of I'll mention things that I'm doing in life, and then he won't ask me questions about it. He won't like try to have, I guess, try to understand or get to know me as a person. I think that's what I was looking for. Like he
Hmm.
wasn't trying to get to know me. He was just
Hmm.
like, I feel like he was talking to me for the sake of talking to me, so that in like 2 months he could ask me for money, which is like unfortunate to say, but that has happened before,
Hmm.
where he'll be like in a tough spot, and then he'll be like, "Oh, why don't they talk to me?" And then it'll be like a week later, he's like, "Yeah, I need $300," and I'm like, "Dude, I'm not rich." Like, uh, so that's a bit unfortunate. But like I said, I'm open to it if he shows me that he's changed. If not, this is gonna sound kind of rough. Um, but if not, it's not gonna bother me to be honest. Like, I think at this point, I've lived so much time without him, and like that, while obviously it's gonna hurt no matter what, that we never had a relationship together. Um, I'm not gonna feel like I'm not gonna. This is gonna sound so rough. I just feel like I'm not gonna feel like I lost somebody. Does that make sense? Like, I think.
I hear what you're saying, Miguel. My parents were divorced when I was in third grade, and then we were not allowed to see him for probably maybe 11 or 12 years. And I, out of the clear blue, I happened to be in New Jersey for a conference, and I knocked on his door and had went out to lunch with him. And I had a chip on my shoulder because I wanted from him the same thing that you're talking about. So I get what you're saying. I picked up the check because I was basically telling him, "Hey, I don't need you," kind of a thing. Over the years, we developed a relationship. I can't say that I ever really respected him in a way that I wanted to respect my father. Uh, and so I found other father figures that I was able to model myself after. But I think my basic personality is what much more of my mom's curiosity, which is what drives me to even be having this conversation with you, is I'm a very curious and nosy person about realizing that everybody has their story. And that's what's so fascinating, is that we all have different stories, but they're so similar. So my question to you, Miguel, would be, who is your father figure? Who has been your father figure, if you've had any, in the years that you've been uh, growing up, the last uh, 10, 11, 12 years? Have you had a father figure or father figures?
Oh, yeah, I had plenty. But before we talk about that, it's funny that
Okay.
you mentioned about how you're more so like your mom,
Yeah.
right? Because I feel like even though my dad wasn't around, I feel like I'm more so like my dad
Oh,
in
really?
terms of like first I look like him a lot,
Hmm.
but the other thing too is like he was into video games. My dad was really smart when he wasn't like before he had his whole alcohol issue. He was like very smart. He was pretty quiet for a long time. I was also very quiet. Uh, he likes rock music like AC/DC, Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, that kind of stuff. I also really like that stuff.
Wow.
So in a lot of ways, I actually ended up being very similar to my dad, even though he
Hmm.
wasn't around. I feel like I took, in a way, I'm like the good parts, even though he wasn't there, which is just
Hmm.
crazy to me to think about. Um,
Have you ever shared that with him?
yeah, yeah, he knows. So he can just look at me, he just knows. So,
Well, he doesn't sound like, or does he? This, I should ask it in a more open way, but does he have the same self-awareness that you have?
I honestly don't know. I would say no, considering like the stuff that he's done or the actions he's done. Probably not. I just think it's just the alcohol that messed him up. I think if you exclude that, then maybe we are very, very similar to that point. But unfortunately, I do not know the answer to that question. Um, Going back to what we were talking about earlier with father figures, I have
Hmm.
a lot of people that help me out in life. Off the top of my head, there's Ben. So Ben is like 37. So he's not, they're just older, but they're not old, right?
Hmm.
They're older. So Ben is
Hmm.
about 37. Um, he lives in Ohio actually, but
Hmm.
very good job. Um, and he's like very good with his money and stuff like that. So for him specifically, I got a lot of career advice, just how to navigate applying for jobs. Maybe what is it like? Saving money, saving for retirement, that kind of stuff. I guess how to more so manipulate the financial system. So I learned a lot of that stuff from him, and it wasn't like he just decided to tell me about that stuff. I like wanted to learn about that stuff, and he was there, and I knew that he was knowledgeable in that field. And I think for the most part, a lot of people are willing to help you out if you ask. I think it's just a matter of asking, and I think people are very afraid of doing that. But I
Why
can
do you think
say,
that is?
oh, I think it's just and it can be a social anxiety thing, like, oh, I don't want to bother this person, like, or even some people may come across as a very serious or very focused on their careers or whatever. But if you just ask them, the worst they can say is no, right? So
Mhm.
if I ask Ben, I'm like, hey, can you help me out with this? And he's like, oh, I can't, I'm busy, or "Oh, I don't know about that stuff, or sorry, I just can't. Like, that's okay. I'm sure I can ask someone else and I'll be able to find the answer I'm looking for. People are not going to hate you if you ask them a question like that or you reach out to them, right? Um, so yeah, so Ben is the guy I go to for that kind of stuff. But I reached out to him again because I wanted to learn about that stuff and I knew that he was good at that stuff. And obviously he was willing to help me out.
Does he know does he know his impact on your life?
Yeah, he knows. I tell him all the time, actually. It's funny.
Well,
Um,
I think that's important. Gratitude and thankfulness is a mental health uh, important for mental health, I think, to be grateful for the people in your life. So he's not exactly an unsung hero. He's somebody that you look up to and respect.
yeah, it's good for your relationships too, right? It's just good to understand, or it's good to know what people mean to you, and I think it's good for them to know what they mean to you and what you mean to them. I think establishes a very like human experience, right? Especially too, so that it's not like I'm asking him all these questions because I'm just using him for his information, right? It was just like we were already friends, and then I knew from talking to him and knowing him that this was the kind of stuff that he knows about and he's good at. So why am I not? And it's also not. That's another thing too. I should probably clarify is that just because you ask somebody who says they know about something or they think they know about something, also may not necessarily mean that you're getting the best advice, right? So, for example,
Sure.
like I have another friend around the same age, Ethan, and so
Same age
Ethan
as Ben or
as
same age
Ben,
as you?
yeah, same age as
Okay.
Ben. So,
Mhm.
if Ben tells me something and maybe I'm not sure about it, or maybe I just want to double check the information, I could also ask Ethan. And so you want to have like people's different perspectives on different things. And I think for the most part, you can kind of tell when somebody is giving you bad information, right? Or at least enough or bad enough to the point where you can suspect that it's not accurate or there's something up. So, but that's why it's important to ask, different people for advice. And then at the end of the day, not necessarily just do whatever they tell you, but to make the decision on your own based on that information. Which maybe at the end of the day, maybe you take that information and then you make a decision and it turns out like that wasn't the best decision. Then at that point, it just becomes a learning experience, right? Which, assuming that we live until we're 80 or 75 or beyond, right? What's one mistake compared to a lifetime, I suppose.
That's a
So,
good attitude. When you're talking about uh, relying on or asking older people and getting a second opinion or third opinion, as the case may be, that's really important. I would imagine that when you're Ben's age or older, well, actually, that's kind of a leading question because I was going to suggest that that's something you'd want to pay it back, as it were, or pay it forward, as the case may be.
mhm.
Um, people that are altruistic and generous with their information and time aren't doing it because they're obligated necessarily. It's because they care about you as a person. So I would imagine that at your as you get older, you're going to do the same. At
Oh,
least
I
that's
plan
in
on it.
your heart. And in that situation, and because of COVID, anxiety and depression has become rampant, I think, because of solitude and lack of interaction in real time, in real person. Uh, what advice would you have for your generation, Gen Z, to deal with anxiety and depression and really mental health issues, addictions for that matter, whether it's alcohol, drugs? What suggestions would you have for your generation?
I think it's it's a lot of not feeling like it's the end. And what I mean by that is I feel like people understand that maybe they have a problem, right, that needs to be resolved. And maybe you give it a crack one time and it doesn't work out, right? I think a lot of people they try a few times and they maybe they're not able to figure it out. And then I feel like at that point they kind of just give up on it. So, and I feel like that's everything, right, in life. But I think it's especially impactful when you have feelings of like anxiety, you're struggling with addiction, you're not sure what your life looks like in 5 years, all this kind of stuff, right? There's always a doubt in it, and maybe you finally build up the courage to tackle whatever issue you have, and it doesn't work out. I think as people, we tend to just kind of like that's it, not gonna need to figure something else out, or I'm not gonna be able to figure this out, or that kind of stuff. Or maybe it's like, oh, well, it's too late now, right? A time issue. And I think in the grand scheme of things, not only is there a lot of time, I suppose, is also that just because one thing doesn't work doesn't mean something else won't work, right? And I think I mentioned earlier I read a lot of philosophy, and there is a quote that I was just about to say, but now I can't remember anymore. Um, but it was essentially like, dang, I wish I remember now. It was such a good quote too. Oh man. But it's basically about like It was written by Marcus Aurelius. It's one of my favorite books. It's called
Are you a
Meditations.
follower of the Stoics?
I read about them, but I would say I don't necessarily practice their method of philosophy. Um, but it's like,
Meditations? Was it from Meditations?
yeah, for meditations, yeah. I have it sitting somewhere. I have a book collection down here. You can't really see it. Sorry, my room's a mess, but it's down there somewhere. My favorite book. I read it like 3 times. Um, but it's just, if one thing doesn't work out, that doesn't mean that's the end of the world. You just got to keep trying. And there's so many different things out there that might work for you in anything. If you struggle with anxiety and you try therapy and it doesn't work, you keep trying other things. But as long as you have a good outlook on it, then, oh, I remember the quote. It's luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity or something like that. So if you're prepared for things and you're still keeping at it, at some point, an opportunity is going to present itself that you just happen to be ready for. And we're going to call it luck. But in reality, maybe you were always ready for it and you just needed something to happen for it to click. And sometimes these are things that happen outside of your control or things that happen directly from your control, right? Um, Maybe for example, me, I got hired at my job because I'm friends with my boss and he referred me. And that opportunity came to me from a friendship that I'd already developed, right? And I just happened to be looking at a job at the time, and he said, "Hey, I have a position like available. Apply for it. I think you're good for it." And obviously, he wouldn't have hired me if he didn't think I could do the job. So at some point during that time, I must have shown that I could do something, right? And a skill that he needed to be done. So, yeah, I think it sucks, but it sucks to say because there is no guaranteed amount of time that something will take to do. But I think the worst thing that you can do is just give up. And even if it's the smallest 10% effort you're putting in, that's still better than nothing. And I'm sure at some point it'll be rewarded. So that's
Have
my
you heard of the
advice.
1% rule by
I've heard,
James Clear?
I have not.
1% improvement every day. Like if you go to the gym one day, you're not going to see much result. You go 2 days, you go to a week, maybe you'll see a little bit. But if you improve 1% for 365 days, you're going to have incredible difference, whatever the task is. It sounds, you know, when you were talking about your gaming and what skills are required in gaming, that your comment about quick decision making and eye-hand coordination are important in success in that regard. It sounds like you've incorporated that approach to life.
Yeah, there's so much stuff I learned from this game. We could have hours conversation about it. Like you'd be so surprised that like getting good at the game, the approach of me getting good at the game is like a way that I've approached getting good at other things in life. And it's like it everything about that game has changed my life. And I would say that like I don't know, just becoming a professional gamer at that game was one thing, but making sure that I was meeting people and talking to people from that game is probably something that's helped me even more. So, which is kind of funny how that works, right? Because it's not even necessarily that because I was good at the video game that made me good at other things. It was more so that being good at this game allowed me to meet other people that then like help me develop my skills more or help me do something that is good for the skill set that I have.
You know, you strike me as having a real good sense of yourself, but you have a lightness in your demeanor. Uh, is that your public face, Miguel, or is that your private face? Are you always as joyful as you appear?
I think if you're just getting to know me, maybe not right away, but if we become friends or we have a conversation, then I think it really shows. Also like I feel like good conversation brings that out too. So if you and I just met right today, but we've
Right.
had some pretty good topics of conversation. So I feel like you got a quick, I don't know, 30-minute, like get to know me real fast, and then now you're kind of just like brought it all out of me. So you got to see the expedited version of this.
The
Uh,
expedited version, huh?
yeah, but I think it takes a little bit, and then it comes out. Um, I'm actually, I know this might sound surprising, but I feel like I'm pretty shy, and a bit reserved. So I feel like if we had met under different circumstances, it might have taken a little bit more. Um, but yeah, you just asked really good questions, good conversation. So you brought it all out of me.
Well, I'm glad I did. Your reputation precedes you, Miguel.
Yeah, I bet did she talk about me a lot? I feel like she might
All
do
the
that.
all the time. Um, Last question, or one of the last ones. I can't promise that this is my last one.
You're okay.
What breaks your heart these days?
What breaks my heart these days? I'll
Yeah.
I'll tell you the one thing that I've been thinking about all the time. I've been thinking about all the time is I have a dog. Her name is
Hmm.
Stella, and she's like 12, or she's turning 12 this year.
Hmm.
And we actually got Stella like 3 months before my dad like got deported.
Hmm.
So now that she's getting older, I'm thinking a lot about how like my time with her is like kind of running out, right?
Hmm.
And you mentioned earlier like time flies, right? It's kind
Hmm.
of you feel like it just happened, and then 10 years later, it's like, wow, that happened like so long ago. So she's been something I've been thinking about a lot in the sense of how knowing that at some point she's gonna pass away, right? Is making me recognize even more that we have to do the things that we want to do when we can, and to make sure that we are like not getting too caught up with being upset about things, or not getting too caught up on what's like just the stuff that's happening in life, right? Just like being able to acknowledge the very simple things of life, which is time, and that a lot of the stuff that's around us in the end may not even be here as long as we think. So, and that's what's been breaking my heart recently, because again, like I love that dog, and she went through a lot of stuff that I also went through, and we went through it together. So, and I've never really experienced death, so this will be like most likely my first experience with that. So, for now, that's what's breaking my heart right now.
Well,
That's what I've been thinking
thanks
about.
for sharing that. A couple of things comes to mind, and we talked briefly about it, is core issues versus periphery issues. Things that are urgent and things that are important. It's so easy in life to get caught up in the urgency of life, or periphery areas. When you're in a game and you're focused, you got to make decisions in what's important long term, whether it's Go, which is another intellectual game,
I know that game.
and also what's core. And what you touched on with Stella, is your dog's name?
Yeah, Stella. Yeah,
The representation of the connection between uh, her and when your dad got deported. From a psychological standpoint, you could certainly appreciate why there's more to it than meets the eye. Some
yeah,
people would say, oh, she's just a dog or whatever, but to you, it's what she represents.
yeah,
So that's a profound awareness of mortality and the whole thing. Not that this helps or anything, but I remember reading something that talked about in 100 years from now, everyone we know will probably be gone. The car that we're driving will be in some junk heap someplace. The
yeah,
house we're living in, somebody else will be living in it. The clothes that we're wearing will be in some resource center, if not burned. So, what do we have that we can hold on to but our memories and the people in our relationships that we foster during our time here on earth? So, that's kind of a perspective in a way that is helpful when one is grieving or anxious, depressed, or whatever, is to gain some context to what we're doing. So,
yeah.
well, listen, Miguel, I really appreciate your willingness to be transparent, share your path, your journey, and I'm excited to imagine what your life will be when you're my age or even 20 years from now. Can you even imagine?
I can't. I've barely been alive 20 years as is. I don't think I can imagine another 20.
Well, any last tips for people your generation that don't have the perspective and don't have the history that you've got? Any last words of encouragement or advice or wisdom?
Yeah, I guess I would say no matter how bad things look now, whether it's personal or political climate, economic situation, whatever it may be, at the end of the day, just keep an open mind, keep learning from the people around you. I mean, I feel like we live in a time of information like being everywhere, right? Being accessible from everywhere, and you really do want to be careful about the information you consume. Like, don't just feel like if
I mean,
how
like
do I say
fake
this? Like,
news?
not even so much fake news, but a lot of people are going to have different perspectives on different things. So when they're telling you their perspective on different things, like what you should be doing when you're 20 or what you should be doing with your money, that kind of stuff,
Hmm.
or what you should be doing as a career, right? It's okay to take in their perspective, but make the decision on your own. And whatever you decide to do, as long as you try your best at it, like I'm sure it's going to work out. Um, but I think just being open-minded and not giving up are probably two of the most important things that we can do, just as people in general, no matter how old you are or what age you're at. So
Well,
that's
that
my,
sounds like good advice. You'd say that to the 13-year-old Miguel?
yeah, I would say that, and he would not listen to me, and then he would just make every mistake that he already made, or that he already made. So I know myself. I would not have followed my own advice. I promise you, nothing.